Okay, last two chapters of the book. I can't put the book down, so I'm going to put the last two chapters up today. If any of you want to watch them, they will be posted. I don't know what to think about the future. Things are looking really bleak at this point. I hope that Leader can get there and still have the strength to help them. If I were to make a guess myself, I already told you guys I have not read the whole book. I'm reading it with you guys for the first time. I have a feeling all three of them will somehow die. I don't know if any of them are going to make it back. I hope I'm wrong. Okay, this will be chapter 20 and 21. They're both very short chapters as we get the resolution in the story. Chapter 20. What are you seeing? Maddie asked her in a hoarse voice. She didn't reply at first. Her eyes were closed. Her fingers moved as if in a dream. The needle went in, and out. He lifted his head to try to see, but his eyes were swollen. When he raised himself, blood still flowed from his nose. He lay back down, groaning from the effort, and in doing so felt the limp body of the puppy shift inside his shirt. Maddie had never experienced such an enormous sadness. His other dog had died in old age, peaceful and ready. But Frolic was only a puppy, new to life, and had been such a spirited creature, so curious and playful. It seemed impossible he would have become a lifeless thing in such a short time. But it was true of everything, he thought. His sadness of it all. For Village, no longer the happy place it had been. For Kira, no longer the sturdy, eager young woman he had always known. And Leader, he wondered what was happening to Leader now. Suddenly Kira seemed to come awake. She whispered, "He's coming. He's close." Her voice was right beside him, very near to Maddie's ear as he lay curled next to her, but it sounded at the same time far away, as if she were moving someplace distant. The vine around his ankle tugged at him, bit into his flesh, anchored itself there, and sent a new shoot upward. Another snaked itself out of the bushes and curled around his foot. Leader didn't notice. He stood immobile, alert. His eyes were open, but he was no longer seeing the vermin-ridden trees around him, their blighted leaves, or the foul, dark mud under his feet. He was looking beyond. He was seeing something beautiful. "Kira," he said, though it was his mind that spoke. His human voice was inaudible now, and his mouth was painfully swollen with open sores. "We need you," she replied. It was her mind speaking too. Maddie beside her heard nothing but the soft flutter of her fingers moving on the fabric. In the place called beyond, Leader's consciousness met Kira's. They curled around each other like wisps of smoke in greeting. "We are wounded," she told him, "and lost." "I am hurt too, and captured here," he replied. With the exchange, they drifted dangerously apart. Where he stood, Leader could feel the vine now. His knee buckled as the sharp-toothed stem bit. He tried to reach for it, but his hands were entangled too. With great effort, his consciousness touched hers again. "Ask the boy for help," he told her. "Do you mean Maddie?" "Yes, though that is not his true name. Tell him we need his gift now. Our world does." Maddie felt Kira stir beside him. She opened her eyes. He watched as her tongue moved to moisten her blistered lips. When she spoke, her voice was so weak he could not make out the words. With difficulty, he leaned painfully toward her, so his ear was near her mouth. "We need your gift," she whispered. Maddie fell back in despair. He had followed Leader's instructions. He had not spent the gift. He had not made Ramon well. He had not fixed Kira's crooked leg or even tried to save his little dog. But it was too late now. His body was so damaged he could barely move. He could no longer bend his ravaged arms. How could he place his hands on anything? And what, in any case, did she want him to touch? So much was ruined. In agony and hopelessness, he turned away from her and rolled off the blanket and into the thick, foul-smelling mud. With his arms outstretched, his hands touching the earth, he lay there waiting to die. He felt his fingers begin to vibrate. Chapter 21, last chapter of the book. It began with the tiniest sensation. It was different from the larger feelings that still racked his body, the searing agony in his arms and hands, the almost unendurable ulceration of his parched mouth, the feverish pounding of his head. This was a whispered hint of power. He felt it in the tips of his fingers, in the whorls and crevices of his outer skin. It moved across his hands as they lay motionless in the mud. Though he shivered from illness and anguish, he could sense his blood beginning to warm and flow. He lay still. Inside him, the thick, dark liquid slid sinuously through his veins. It entered his heart and throbbed there, moving with purpose through the labyrinth of muscle, collecting energy that came faintly to it from his collapsing lungs. He could feel it surge in his arteries. Within the blood itself, he could perceive its separate cells. He could see their colors in his consciousness, the prisms of their molecules. All of it was awake now, gathering power. He could feel his own nerves, each one, millions of them, taut with energy waiting to be released. The fibers of his muscles tightened. Gasping, Maddie called for his gift to come. There was no sense of how to direct it. He simply clawed at the earth, felt the power in his hands entered, pulsating into the ruined world. He became aware suddenly that he had been chosen for this. Near him, Kira began to breathe more easily. What had been close to coma turned now to sleep. Not far away, Leader tentatively lifted one foot and found it free of the entangling vine. He opened his eyes. Back in village, a breeze came up. It came through the windows of the home place where Ramon lived with his family. Ramon sat up suddenly in the bed, where he had lain ill for days. He felt the fever begin to seep from him. The blind man sensed the breeze entering the open windows and lifting an edge of the tapestry on the wall. He felt the fabric. He found the stitches as even and smooth as they had been in the past. Matty groaned and pressed his hands harder into the ground. All of his strength and blood and breath were entering the earth now. His brain and spirit became part of the earth. He rose. He floated above, weightless, watching his human self labor and writhe. He gave himself to it willingly. He traded himself for all that he loved and valued and felt free. Leader walked forward. He wiped his face with his hands and felt the lesions fade as if they had been cleansed away. He could see the path clearly now, for the bushes had drawn back, their leaves bright with new green growth and dappled with buds. A yellow butterfly lit on a bush, paused, and darted off. Rounded stones bordered the path, and sunlight filtered down through the canopy of trees. The air was fresh. He could hear a stream flowing nearby. Maddie could see and hear everything. He saw Jean beside her garden calling out in happy greeting to her father. He saw Mentor stooped once more and balding, waved to her from the path where he was walking toward the schoolhouse with a book in his hand. His face was stained again with the birthmark. Poetry had returned to him. Maddie heard him recite, "Today, the road all runners come, shoulder high we bring you home, and set you at your threshold down, townsmen of a stiller town." He saw the wall builders walk away from their work. He heard the new ones singing in their own languages, 100 different tongues, but they understood one another. He saw the scarred woman standing proudly in the midst beside her son, and the people of village gathered to listen. He saw Forrest and understood what Seer had meant. It was an illusion. It was a tangled knot of fears, deceits, and dark struggles for power that had disguised itself and almost destroyed everything. Now it was unfolding, like a flower coming into bloom, radiant with possibility. Drifting there, he looked down and saw his own self becoming motionless. He felt his breathing slow. He sighed, let go, and felt a sense of peace. He watched Kira wake, and he saw Leader find her there. Kira took a cloth to the stream and brought it back, moistened, to wash Maddie's still face. Leader had turned him over. She sobbed at the sight of him, but was glad his terrible wounds were gone. She bathed his arms and hands. The skin was firm and unblemished, without scars. "I knew him when he was a little boy," she said, weeping. "He always had a dirty face and a mischievous spirit." She smoothed his hair. He called himself the fiercest of the fierce. Leader smiled. He was that, but it was not his true name. Kira wiped her eyes. He so hoped to receive his true name at the end of this journey. He would have. He wanted to be messenger, Kira confided. Leader shook his head. No, there have been other messengers, and there will be more to come. He leaned down and placed his hand solemnly on Maddie's forehead above the closed eyes. Your true name is Healer, he said. A sudden rustling in the bushes startled them both. "What's that?" Kira asked in alarm. At her voice, the puppy, his fur matted with twigs, emerged from the place where he had been hiding. "It's Frolic." Kira took him into her arms, and he licked her hand. Beside her, tenderly, Leader picked up what remained of the boy and prepared to carry him home. In the distance, the sound of keening began. Wow, what a really sad ending. Maddie saved Kira. He saved Leader. He saved his puppy. He saved everybody. And apparently the people in the village know as the sound of keening has begun. If you recall, that is their funeral passage. The keening is the sound they make. What a heroic way to end a book for the fiercest of the fierce. I really liked Matty in Gathering Blue. He was my favorite character. He was my favorite character in this one. It shows you what the power of one is all about. I hope you guys do take the time to finish the book. If you do, finish the book and you want to send me a message on what you thought, drop me an email. Be happy to read it. I'll respond to you what I think too. I am going to read Sun. That'll be some of my summer reading. I do want to read the fourth book in the series, and I want to see how it all turns out. I want to know if Gabriel somehow makes a comeback into this book, and I want to see if we find out a reaction from Jean when she finds out that Maddie is dead. I want to see what happens if Kira and her father, what that reunion is going to look like. There are many, many, many things in the fourth book that I hope wrap up for us. All right? You guys be safe. It was a wonderful school year. Love all of you guys. You guys are nothing but the best. And we'll see you when we see you. Bye-bye.